Hi, I was just playing some musics. And that's got me thinking, what lessons can I take from 15 years of writing and producing music and apply to the craft of writing? Here are some lessons that writing and producing music has taught me about writing novels. Repetition and evolution. Music is all about patterns, repeating rhythms and cycles that ebb and flow as the song progresses. Like writing, there can be certain conventions you follow which allow listeners to engage with the music, but the patterns within music can also evolve and change as the song progresses. Classical music is a great example of this kind of evolving pattern technique. The same phrases will be repeated again and again in exactly the same way, then suddenly a slight flourish will be introduced, a major where there has previously been a minor, an added ninth, or a slightly longer hold to the final chord. And these slight changes are what gives the music flavor and texture. Just like a unique turn of phrase or the singular use of a great word gives your writing punch and gravitas. As writers, we're trained to vary language as much as possible to keep the reading interesting. But if music teaches us anything, it's that repetition isn't necessarily a bad thing. Provided it's all part of a well-crafted story and it's essential to the novel, repetition can be a great ally. A character repeating a word of prophecy or a promise they've uttered at a seminal moment in their personal history can form a potent part of your story. Having your protagonist go through the motions of their mundane existence day in and day out can emphasize the existential meaninglessness of their life. As with music, repetition also provides a fantastic opportunity to surprise your audience with a sudden twist on what's expected. We shouldn't shy away from repetition as writers, provided it's intentional and it forms an integral part of our story. The twist. Music follows certain logical patterns, but one of the more delightful aspects of composing is in subverting those patterns. You draw listeners along with a sweet melody only to put a sting in the tail by means of a minor chord or a single discordant note. You might repeat the same refrain 3 times and then on the 4th shift from a minor to a major. In writing, we call this a twist or a red herring. Just as with music, you lead readers towards a certain conclusion only to shift the narrative at the last minute to shock and delight your audience. The key in both music and writing is subtlety. Listeners and readers need to be drawn along without knowing that they're being led. For a twist or a surprise to really work, it needs to shock your audience. Think about when you've had to walk down a broken escalator. That moment when you step off and your brain is convinced that you should be moving faster than you actually are. That's exactly what great music and writing can do. Convince your brain that the story is heading in one direction and then at the last minute defy expectation entirely and go in a different direction. The journey motif. Watch any Lord of the Rings movie without the soundtrack and you'll get an idea of how important music is to the experience of watching films. Music is what invests the story with emotion. It's what signals a deep foreboding when something evil approaches or indicates safety once a hero has prevailed against trial and tribulation. Music runs ahead of the story, carrying the audience along and heightening their emotional investment in the narrative. But even outside of film, great music tends to tell a story. Tension rises and falls, volume grows louder and then softer, giving the music a sense of journey and drawing the listener along. But the genius of music is in its immediacy to the human brain. It reaches us quickly, drawing us in and pulling us along at our emotional core. Writing is a trickier beast because we have to use language as our instrument and can't rely on the immediacy of emotion that music engenders. Writing is a much slower burn. It takes time to develop a connection with readers, but the good news is that that time represents a powerful investment. As long as you can keep readers intrigued long enough to keep reading, that investment in your story will grow, allowing you to carry them along on a roller coaster, rising and lowering tension, speeding up pace and slowing it down. And with each new page, their investment in the story will grow and your license to twist and turn the story will increase. I grew to love it. I've often found that songs I love instantly quickly grow stale after a while, whereas songs that I'm not immediately drawn to can often become my favorites. Some songs are an acquired taste, and these often end up being those we cherish in the long run. But writing isn't quite so forgiving. If a reader dislikes your book immediately, the chances that they'll keep reading are slim. Even if you do manage to steer them around by the end of the book, they'll likely preface any recommendation of your novel with that dreaded phrase. It starts off really slow, but you've just got to push through that early stuff until it gets good. Unlike music, books are rarely forced upon us. We don't turn on the radio to hear readings of the latest crime novel. There aren't books being narrated in the background of Hollywood blockbusters. In contrast, we're constantly exposed to music, even music we don't particularly like. Sometimes that exposure can cause us to grow in love with a song we didn't first like, but the same isn't necessarily true of writing. Music can also slowly insinuate itself into our lives, whereas words that aren't read have no impact. Yes, readers might grow to love a book they didn't like the first time round, but you only get one shot at a first impression, and I'd rather hook the right readers and have them thrilled to the end than count on people who didn't like my novel coming back for a second bite. Tension. Nothing raises tension like music. Watch any thriller or horror film and replace the soundtrack with the song Barbie Girl by Aqua and you'll see exactly what I mean. All the tension just evaporates. The way you build tension with music is by using low, brooding tones interspliced with dissonant flashes. You raise the volume, the pace, or musical intensity as the song progresses. There are certain chord progressions, melodic phrases, and techniques which can heighten the tension in music. And the same is true of writing. But without the emotional immediacy of music, writers are left to use words and the reader's own imagination to build suspense. We have to remove anything that stands between the reader and our protagonist, drawing our audience into the story so that they actually feel like they're right there with our main character. The lesson we can learn from music here is to lay down a brooding foundation and then intersperse moments of increased tension here and there. A subtle snatch of dialogue, a glint of light reflected in a window, our protagonist's internal sense that something is off. Build tension in your writing by strategically placing these moments of dissonance which disrupt the slow burn of your story. Increase their frequency or intensity as the story draws to a climax, and then spring your trap. Whether you're writing music or a novel, the skill of building tension takes practice, but the good news is that there's plenty of sources to draw from. Watch your favorite thriller films, read your favorite novels, study the way tension is maintained and heightened, and then apply what you've learnt to your own writing. Dissonance. We tend to like music that's melodious and harmonious. We like certain chord progressions and melody types, which is why 95% of pop songs all have the same chord progression: G, D, E minor, and C. Something about our squidgy little human brains responds well to this combination of notes and melodies. But music can also be dissonant, confronting, and downright offensive. Musicians can use our human love of harmony against us by purposely composing songs which subvert the norm and press uncomplimentary chords against one another to create a sense of unease for the audience. Of course, you might be writing some avant-garde musical piece designed to disturb and comment on society's ills. But the more common use of dissonance is to resolve into a more melodious section of music. Like passing through a storm, the listener endures the dissonance and emerges into a space filled with blue skies and sunlight. The emotional uplift you feel at that point is much more profound because of the storm which has been endured. Great writers use dissonance in a similar way, forcing their protagonist to run the gauntlet and face the storm, placing the reader in uncomfortable positions and reflecting real-world injustices. If used sparingly and well, these moments of dissonance, strife, and confrontation can heighten the reader's emotional state once the resolution is finally reached. Learning the craft. One big difference between writing music and a novel is that most people already have the skill of writing sentences down before they start to write a book. That can give new writers an unrealistic sense of just how easy it's going to be to write that novel. With music though, there tends to be an initial learning curve which prohibits a lot of people from getting started, typically learning to play an instrument. In both cases though, you never truly arrive as an artist. You move through the beginning stages and reach a point of basic competence, and then you might continue to learn and develop your skills to get to the point where you're producing professional quality work. If music is your obsession, however, you won't be able to stop yourself from learning and developing. You'll try new things, experiment, fail, learn, and try again. You'll watch YouTube videos, bore your friends and relatives with endless details about your latest discovery, read widely, attend training seminars, and continually push yourself to become better at your craft. All of that is fantastic, but if you're as impatient as I am, I'll offer just one piece of advice. Focus on progress, not perfection. Incremental improvements will make a huge difference over time. So just focus on progressing your craft bit by bit and the results will follow. Whether you're learning an instrument, writing an opera, or writing an epic fantasy novel, the same holds true. Progress, not perfection. So there we have it, some lessons that music has taught me about writing novels. Now I've learned a lot more, particularly about the business side of things, but we can cover that off in another video. Now if you're curious as to whether you should be using AI to help you write your novels, check this out.